welcome to Cybercrime Studios. Chad Holmes is with us today. He is the Executive Vice President for Chief Services and the Operations Officer at Optiv, Inc. So welcome.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Thanks. Well, you've been called, we're very excited to have you here. You've been called a cybersecurity guru in the media. Mm-hmm. You've been doing cybersecurity work for how many years now?
20 plus. Lost track, quick counting, but over 20 years.
Over 20 years. So tell me a little bit about your background and how you found your way into this field.
Yes. It's an interesting story. My father was actually a general contractor, and my first degree was actually in building architecture. And so it really kind of drove, creativity. I've just naturally had that kind of creative gene. So went to school for architecture, was working at an architectural firm, and then I was in that age where everything was starting to become more digitized. Mm-hmm. So we started moving everything from board architectural designs to actually, CAD drawings and workflows system. And stuff, right? So I started taking over all the IT aspects of everything I was doing, and actually transitioned and went back to school for computer engineering, computer science, and took over at the time as internet-only bank. Hired in as really their information officer at the time, and I did that for about a year, and then it was really early in the stages of security, and security started becoming the new thing. Everybody was trying to figure out their slice of the IT bucket. What's the most innovative thing in IT? And at the time, it was really interesting was the cybersecurity aspect of it. So I really started focusing at that time. It really wasn't what we consider cybersecurity today. It was more information security. Mm-hmm. And it was really, I would say, really looking at risk and vulnerability identification, attack and pin activity. So my inroad to security was really exploiting databases and web applications and really kind of breaking into my own environment through that process. And I did that for a while. I would say about a third of my career was been spent in the operational space industry, with being a CISO or a architect or engineer inside an organization.
So you have a very highly technical background.
I do.
Yeah.
A very, very technical background in nature, very much focused on kind of the threat space. And then spent a while doing that, and then I got highly recruited from the OEMs or the VARs or the actual product companies. And really, I was looking for how to take what I'm doing. I kind of understood the operational aspects of security, and I really was looking to what's next. Mm-hmm. And, how do I have a bigger impact on the industry more broadly? And it really was, how do I help innovate products to solve for industry challenges? So I started, got recruited into a product company. At the time, firewalls was the hot thing, so it was Checkpoint. And then I started moving down a path of making different moves inside the organizations, from developing innovative technology to product management to really kind of driving the outcomes that we were looking to for the industry. And kind of evolutionary, kind of went through that process and ended up, was at McAfee and then got sold to Intel. And then my CEO went over to FireEye, Dave DeWalt, and he kind of recruited me to come over as one of the CTOs at FireEye. And really, it was early stages. We were about 100 people and really looking to kind of take our one product and innovate it and trying to create a whole new market, which we did. And went through that, kind of evolution of creating a new market, understanding the threat landscapes, understanding how actors behave, and building technology that solved for that problem.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and then finally, the third part of my career is really around, I was trying to figure out, okay, now, how do I have the larger impact for organizations? I've kind of went through operational aspects. I've started building technology for organizations, but now I wanted to look at how do I have a huger impact on organizations, and really kind of with my inroad into consulting. Mm-hmm. I've owned my own consulting organizations in the past, but then I made a transition from FireEye over to EY, where I ran a lot of their security practice. And it was really focused on driving innovation around kind of the big consulting organizations and providing that strategic value for clients around how to solve the broader security issue.
Right.
And not just a point-in-time threat issue around identifying threat actors. Is really how do you open up and solve the bigger program. And that's kind of really where I started getting into really focusing on the larger strategic aspects of how security interfaces with kind of the business challenges.
You're definitely a thought leader in that area of just when we were discussing before, kind of the transformative elements and innovative elements that are affecting businesses now, such as going digital and using automation, AI, and machine learning. And it's this you've said is kind of spurring a new need in cybersecurity and for cybersecurity, built-in security. So, what can you tell me a little bit about that and how Optiv helps solve client problems when it comes to that?
Yeah, I would say the security industry's gone through a lot of evolutions, right? I mean, we started with focusing on risk and compliance and how to solve for that issue, and then we started going into how to solve for the threat aspect of what we're trying to solve for, threat actors and breaches and everything else. And now we're seeing this evolution of where organizations are transforming. They're going from, the legacy concept of how do I just protect the gates, build the walls around my organization and protect what's on the inside and keep everything out. Now it's becoming more fluid where organizations are required to transform to stay alive. They're trying to transform the organization from a business perspective, from how to compete with the new innovative technology companies that are coming up and disrupting their industry, if it's in automotive or healthcare or whatever industry is disrupting them. So you're seeing these large organizations now pivot. And that pivot is really driving a unique challenge for the operators. And that's really because now it becomes less about a liability to an organization of building the walls and keeping people out and taking the no answer to everything from a security point of view. Is now, how do I become inclusive and go down that journey with them to help the organization transform? And I think that's the real big piece of it, where organizations, especially in the CISO organization, been more of a liability to the business. Now they're having to figure out how to transform their organization, be more proactive, and be on the front cuff of where the organization is going to. And I would say historically what I've seen, it varies on the maturity of the organization and the client and the segmentation, but I would say typically the business now is making a decision on where they want to go. And then that business owner, as they make that decision, hands off some tactical elements of, hey, go change the business. Typically it's the digital officer or somebody is empowered and accountable to change that business. And then it goes through an evolution, right? Or it goes down this journey. And then the digital officer says, okay, this is what we got to do to transform the business. This is how we stay relevant. And then they may or may not bring in security to that process. If they do, it's on the later stage of it. And they're like, okay, I'm moving to the cloud, or I'm automating this technology, or taking this business function and bringing in technology to do robotic process automation, whatever it is, right? And then security's saying, okay, what tech do I have that I can use off the shelf to solve for that problem?
So it's more of a reactive approach.
Very reactive, but it's really, I would say, it's too separated to what the business is trying to accomplish. So what you're seeing in the last, I would say, the decade of a breach is what I call it, is really organizations spent a lot of time throwing technology at the problem. They overconsumed technology. Security industry exploded. We went from thousands of security technologies, 20, 30, 50 different EDR technologies on the endpoint. So there's this explosion of technology. And so organizations thought the resolution to their problem was consume the hottest tech, try to build what I call micro features out of those techs and assign those micro features to problems.
I see. Yeah.
But what happens is they most of the time overspend and still underdeliver. They still get compromised, they still get breached because it's hard to solve the security challenge holistically, especially for a large organization. So the key is to get more proactive and be part of the business decision early. What I've seen to be most effective. So if the digital officer or the board or the CEO is saying, hey, we got to pivot and move this direction, saying, okay, how do we secure the cloud containers before we move data to it? How do we secure the data lakes before we build a holistic data lake? How do we understand the business processes and secure those as we're transforming? And I think that's where we're seeing the best success. But the problem is most organizations, or really most of the personnel in security, that's not a natural thing for them. They want to get in the bits and bytes. They want to get very technical. They want
Right.
to understand the sexiness of security. And now it's becoming more of a, how do I understand what drives revenue for my organization, and how do I help them innovate and still secure that innovation?
Would you tell a CISO who's listening to this to become more involved with the business aspects and what the board has in mind as far as, the future of their organizations instead of getting so technical and in the weeds?
Well, I would say most of the senior CISOs with the larger organizations has kind of made this turn, and they know that they need to be more involved in that business decisions. We're seeing more CISOs being invited to the board, but there's still a huge degree of separation there. I wouldn't say it's a large group of organizations adopting the CISO to the board. A lot of it is because it's the approach. Typically, I've seen they go in and start talking about the tactical challenges they have, from identifying the amount of threats that are trying to compromise them and what are the controls they're putting in place to prevent that. But most of the board members may or may not even understand that, right? So unless they can translate that into business terms of what it means to the business to take on these new controls, that's where the breakdown is happening.
Sure.
So I would say yes, absolutely. We need to do better as an industry to focus on how to help executive leaders in these organizations understand the dynamic of what security means. We're seeing boards and others form an opinion on it. It could be wrong, it could be right, it varies on the organization. We're also I've seen a lot where boards are bringing in outside security consultants to sit on the board instead of having their CISO sit on the board. And typically that's just because of the degree of separation
Is it a
of
communication
understanding
issue?
the business
Vocabulary
aspect. Yeah,
kind of?
communication, understanding, really translation. I think it's a
Translation.
translation issue typically. But you're seeing, especially the large organizations, have more, the CISOs, the global CISOs are very first in the business components because they realize they have to be. And then they build supporting liaison systems, if it's business ISOs or technical ISOs. So you'll see a different degree of separation because you don't want to lose that technical aspect of understanding how to secure an organization,
Right.
because you still have to translate the requirements to the technicians.
Still have to go back downstairs and do the work.
Right. So you still have to go downstairs as you still need to go
Right.
upstairs, right? So you got to translate both sides. So you're seeing a adoption of the CISO organization becoming larger than just one person. It is multiple people trying to solve for multiple challenges, especially in the big Fortune companies, solving that more broadly. So that's where I'm seeing the most success. It's not really, it's, continue to evolve, understand the business challenges, understand what your organization is trying to do, and then try to get proactive on being on the front of the funnel activities instead of just trying to, hey, pick the technology that serves the problem to date.
Got it.
Yeah.
Another big challenge for CISOs and for all organizations dealing with any kind of cybersecurity is the talent shortage and talent acquisition. It's very, very competitive. So how does a consulting approach help CISOs with the talent shortage?
Well, I think everybody is challenged by this problem, right? If it's organizations, product companies, or even large consulting companies like Optiv, large system integrators, they're all challenged with the same problem. Now, the difference is the flexibility to retain the talent and acquire the talent. For organizations, they get allocated a certain budget. They get so many heads to solve for whatever the problem is, and typically they have more projects they have to execute on during the year than they have time or people. So even if they could hire enough people, I don't know if they could afford the people. So that's why a lot of organizations take more of a hybrid approach to solving the security challenge. They understand that they can't hire enough, so they use consulting organizations to solve that problem. I've never ran across a security organization that does not use consultants. They typically use consultants of what they're good at, and they focus them on those certain areas. But what happens then is it frees up their talent internally, their full-time employees, to focus on more of the strategic activities or the more complicated activities. And the consulting organizations become a flexing agent for the organization. And they really need that if it's going through a breach response or if it's, identifying a complex environment and trying to identify all their risk controls and putting those in place. They really need consulting organizations to assist them through that process. Now, to answer your original question is, how do they solve for it?
Yeah, does it help the talent?
Yeah, it's a
issue?
complicated problem, right? So we've self-created this problem on ourselves of how to the backfill of security. Security's become such a hot industry that's drove this, the market in the industry to move a certain direction. So, but we've never really built the university programs to support it and build those long-term programs. We haven't started earlier in the careers or even in the high school and elementary to bring and introduce security aspects. We do that with coding and getting into kids in coding classes and others, even in the middle school and younger. But we haven't started introducing, I would say, conceptual ideas around what security means to them, especially in this digital world. And I think that's the evolution we have to get to. Now, we have seen different movements in the industry too, where gig economy is very popular. We have a huge influx of millennials now, and how to kind of solve for that problem. Organizations typically, unless they allow for a lot of remote workers and distributed workforce, they typically can't attract some of those more millennial gig economy type of people, right? So where consulting organizations are very flexible, we allow flexible travel, we get them exposed to not just one organization's problem, but many organizations' problem.
At Optiv, we're speaking.
At Optiv, at Optiv, yeah. I mean, Optiv, we specialize, we have over 1,000 consultants, so we work with probably over 10,000 engagements a year, and we're working with the Fortune organizations trying to solve their complex issues. So we have to bring and expose our consultants to new problems. And it's when they get bored or they get complacent is when they start looking. And so being able to expose them to a problem at XYZ company today in one industry and then tomorrow expose them to a different problem in a different industry, it really rounds out their capabilities.
And that helps with the retention of the talent?
Helps with retention in the consulting space for sure at Optiv. But this is a challenge where the organizations are challenged with because typically they're in one industry and they have one problem or they have one challenge they're trying to solve for. They have a lot of challenges in the security space, but they have, normally it's a standard problem set they're trying to solve for. So we're at Optiv, we definitely recruit from the universities. We have intern programs. We're looking at more of a neurodiversity aspect of it too. We've seen a lot of success around people, not just in bringing in different diversities around gender from a women's perspective, which we've seen a lot of success with also, but also people with, special conditions like high functioning autism. Some of those conditions really play well to security because a lot of it is running through remedial tasks and doing it at a high quality aspect, if it's managed services or if it's incident response or it's different components of what we need to do. So we're seeing this evolution of bringing in talent to solve for that challenge, but also automation is solving for it too. Automation is kind of driving, I guess, relieving that pressure valve on organizations too. Bringing in innovations drive automation. But the problem is most organizations we've seen or I work with, that Optiv works with, is really, normally they don't know what their processes should look like. So we have to go in and define the processes. And then we have to then automate and digitize those processes.
Where you can,
right.
I hear, I was just at a conference last week where some folks were a little bit afraid of artificial intelligence taking over some of their jobs. Do you think that that's a valid concern?
Yeah, it varies on the role. It varies on the job.
Varies on the role.
Yeah,
sure.
I would say potential, but I don't see it's if by the time we get to point of real robotics and others taking on full on jobs, I think it's going to be future for us. I mean, we're seeing some automation take on like tier 1 analyst roles,
right?
And some of the remedial tasks. You can automate through some of that. There is some aspects of machine learning. I don't typically care for some of the buzzwords like artificial intelligence. I don't think we're really there yet.
It's kind of
it's
an exaggeration.
Yeah,
of
it's
what
exaggeration of what it really is. So
yeah.
it's hard to say that AI is really going to take on jobs
it's more
today.
Machine learning,
analytics. We're helping organizations take the data and make educated decisions off of it. But there's aspects of problems with that, right? One, they don't know the process. Typically, two, they don't have all the data centralized. So making business decisions or security decisions off data that they don't have, it becomes challenging. So possibly
Yes.
in the future.
So next week you said that you're going to be presenting at one of the Optiv cons. How many conferences does Optiv do every year? And what can we expect to hear from you next week in, I think it's Dallas?
That's right. Yeah. So we at Optiv we have a huge focus on our clients and really kind of educating through that process. So we do Optiv cons throughout the country. I don't have the exact number. It's definitely in the high double digits. I think it's over 20 we do throughout the year, and it's very focused on the larger cities where we're bringing in different unique speakers. I will be presenting at the one in Dallas next week, and we do bring in some other industry leaders to get exposed to our clientele. So we'll typically run from anywhere between 200 to 300 people at these regional events, and it's really most organizations can't travel.
Yeah.
So we
More than
always
once a year to
we bring the speakers and the innovators to them,
keep
and where
it
they
kind
can
of
get
local.
localized, and so we keep them very localized. But some of the topics we'll be talking about next week is really some of the stuff we've already kind of talked about. It's really how do we meet the business where it is in its evolution and make sure we can provide the security at that time and point. So everything from migrations to cloud to orchestration automation or RPA to DevSecOps. There's a lot of different components in there that will be kind of educating the team on not just the trends of security, but really some of the tactical elements of what they can do when they get back to their organization to take action on.
That sounds great. And you do have a New York office.
We do, absolutely. Yeah, we have, I believe, 28 offices in the U.S. We do have global presence at Optiv in the UK, India, and other locations around the world.
Oh, that's great. So, Chad, what are you passionate about when it comes to cybersecurity and this work?
Yeah, so I have a lot of different passions. I would say, one of the big passions is kind of talking about how do we solve for the talent challenge. I'm very passionate about how do we use not just technology and process, but unique diversity of people to kind of solve for that problem.
Yeah.
Like we talked about a little bit before around neurodiversity. One of my children actually has autism, so I'm really focused on how to take some of those advancements in healthcare and taking innovation of technology and bringing that together to solve some of the bigger challenges.
That's fantastic.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have a nonprofit focused on that. I do a lot of work on that front. Really just taking the innovation, what we do, and kind of elevating some of the healthcare, because sometimes healthcare is always kind of the last one to evolve. But outside of that, I would say the other real passion of mine is really helping organizations solve. I've gone down the path as CTO at FireEye and other organizations of solving for the threat problem, as that's a very important problem to our challenge that we're trying to solve for. I think the larger problem is how do we evolve as a security organization to solve some of the business challenges, and what does that mean to an organization? So I do a lot of speaking to a lot of CISOs and others and entrepreneurs are trying to figure out how they get new startup funding to solve some of these bigger challenges, and try to educate some of the CISOs on how they need to evolve their thinking a little bit to solve for their business challenges. But I think most of the organizations are very passionate, or the people in those organizations are very passionate and understand the challenge they got to solve for. Sometimes they don't always know how to get there. And, being in the industry as long as I have, I've seen it kind of take full circle.
Sure.
So I can see and tell and kind of predict a little bit about where the industry's going and how to get in front of it.
Well, where is the industry going? It's 2019, 2020 is coming up. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say it varies on the industry you're talking to. If you look at the big financials, they've gone from off-prem cloud and moving to on-prem, or they're going to a hybrid approach, so they're evolving their business practices associated with it. From a security point of view, I think we're going to continue to evolve at a rapid pace. I think we're going to see a merger between IT and security more blended over time. We kind
Kind
of
of like a built-in model.
yeah, if you look at some of the vendors out there, I mean, if you look at the RPA, the robotic process automation vendors, compared to the SOAR vendors, they provide similar capabilities but different. They're different vendors based off our security industry compared to vendors in the IT industry. But if you look at the funding they're getting in the IT industry, it's way larger than what the security industry is getting. So now you're seeing an influx of the IT providers coming into the security industry, and they're taking on the bigger problem. And then primarily it's because they have different personas and buyers they're interfacing with. So they're working with the CIO or some of the executives, where typically the security vendors are very siloed into their security niche.
Right.
So it's easier for the IT vendors to come over the top onto the security vendors and kind of take out markets. So you're seeing a huge consolidation. But to your question is, where's the industry going? That's a broad question, because I could take it a technical way, I could take it to a business aspect. But what I'm seeing more fundamentally is a consolidation of the industry is the biggest thing I'm seeing. You're seeing large Fortune companies buying product OEMs, and they're using that, if it's through their venture arms or in their internal security, to solve some of their bigger challenges. At Optiv, we have a innovative design services arm where we're doing true integration. And the reason we do that is organizations are now trying to rationalize what they spent. They're trying to take their 70 to 100 security products they spent and trying to get the best ROI out of it. And then some of it is, hey, if I'm a big financial, I'm going to break the technology because I'm so big. I got 2 million endpoints. I'm going to probably break it, right? So how do I buy technology, maybe acquire it directly, or build it in-house? So I'm seeing a lot of large organizations building technology in-house to solve for their problems. We're also seeing they're taking a unique open source angle to it, and then bringing some, I would say, gap fillers from the industry itself. So how do you take intellectual property that you built internally, and you take stuff off the shelf, and you take open source? How do you solve for your problem without causing sustaining issues and overhead? And that's where I see the industry going to, where we're providing unique, innovative design services of stitching together 2 or 3 different business models to solve for the cybersecurity issue. So when organizations decide they want to buy technology or build technology, how do they still innovate in a way and still use technology off the shelf to continue to reduce their cost, but still solve for their problem? So a lot of different aspects of how they're doing that, and fundamentally it gets back to consolidation. We'll see the industry consolidate if it's IT taking on security, if it's corporations taking on security, if you'll see different, and even at RSA this year, we saw organizations having booths in the conference that are not vendors.
Right.
You saw Comcast, you saw different vendors there having booths, and they had different products that they acquired. So it's a different evolution of
It's not
security.
just a total vendor
Yeah.
fest with like new product, but it's also consulting, consolidation.
Yeah, you're seeing a big
VARs.
you're seeing a big uptick in system integrators like
System
like
integrators.
like Optiv, taking on and innovating and driving innovation and solving solutions and outcomes and focusing on those outcomes. You're seeing the industry move from tactical problem statements and kind of the scare factor to more of outcome-based business problem solving.
Yeah.
So you're seeing that, and then you're also seeing an evolution of how organizations want to consume. We're seeing organizations want to consume, especially in security, differently, because the evolution of security from a vendor perspective moves rapidly, like a 3-year shelf life. How do they get that ROI out of their
Sure.
technology?
And then it's irrelevant after a couple of years.
It is very irrelevant. So that's why we're seeing a big push in the industry where buyers are looking to buy as a service offerings, where technology and consulting services are combined, and they're buying an outcome. So they don't have to buy the technology if they in 3 years decide they still have the same problem. They're pushing the risk to the integrators to figure out from a technology perspective, and they're not absorbing that risk from a financial point of view. And I think you'll see different type of consumption models with the consolidation of the industry, and different ways to buy will drive different type of outcomes.
So what other advice would you give the industry about innovation?
Yeah, I would say innovation is relative, right? So I would say most of the larger organizations are doing innovation from an acquisition point of view, and some are building it internally. My advice to organizations as they innovate is, we need to get more focused and focus on the business challenges of organizations instead of being another Me Too vendor, right? So instead of trying to drive micro features and taking a feature out of a technology and saying, I'm going to drive revenue here, focus on what is the larger challenge and working with multiple vendors and to innovate into a larger solution. And I challenge some of the VC community on this too, because a lot of people want to capitalize on the money they have. And we're seeing a huge influx of cash go into cyber, even still. But is it really helping the industry, or is it really hurting the industry? Right? And what I mean by that is, are we solving problems by funding startups that actually solve a bigger problem? Or are we just continuing to go down and down and down on the micro feature side to create new startups for a revenue point of view?
Sure.
So we're not trying to solve for what the consumer or the CISO or the chief digital officer or the risk officer is trying to solve for. We're just trying to figure out how to invest in new technology to get the return.
To kind of hop on the cybersecurity revenue train.
Right. And then they're trying to figure out how to stitch it together. And that's why you see common trends at a lot of the conferences. Everybody's saying the same marketing terms.
Pretty much doing the same thing.
It's the same thing. So, and it's confusing the market. And then organizations like Optiv has to come in and partner with the organization to give them clarity around the chaos they have to deal with.
Sure.
Right. So what vendors are really solving that problem? And then we have to we work with over 500 vendors at Optiv. So how do we take that chaos and provide that clarity is one of the biggest asks that we get from our customers typically.
So is Optiv one of the biggest system integrators or one of the biggest pure play cybersecurity system integrators in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's probably unknown. Our history and our brand's been very heavily focused on kind of value-added reselling, but we have over 1,000 consultants dedicated in cyber just in the U.S., not counting global expansion. So we are by far the largest pure-play dedicated cybersecurity consulting organization. Even when you start looking at the big consulting organizations and their isolated business and security, we by far typically double their size. And a lot of people don't realize that.
Sure.
But we do provide everything from advisory consulting services to integration services to providing operational integration from a cyber operations perspective. So it's really end to end and really trying to help customers not just strategy, but really tactical execution. And a lot of the CISOs I talk to will say it all the time. They'll say, I don't need somebody to build the paper and tell me what I need to do from a strategy point of view. I need people to help me implement, execute, and deliver on the projects that I have to get to secure my environment. And that's where we spend a lot of our time focusing on helping them execute.
That's great. It sounds like a very wise model, and this was very, very insightful. So thanks for coming up today. We really appreciate it.
No, absolutely. I appreciate you having me.